Have you ever stopped to think that the Vikings, the people celebrated for their steel blades and fire-bright longships, cooked their food without using a single piece of metal? Sounds impossible, right? But the truth is even more shocking. They could cook an entire cow using nothing but stone and fire. And if they picked the wrong kind of stone, the whole kitchen could explode like an ancient grenade. It was in those life-or-death moments that the Vikings forged something archaeologists still struggle to explain today: a cuisine built on the razor-thin line between chaos and genius. To a Viking, a fire wasn't just for cooking. It was an invisible battlefield where the skill of the firekeeper was tested every second. A damp river stone could shatter instantly, blasting sharp fragments powerful enough to kill. But a dry, dense, ancient stone heated to a glowing red turned into the ultimate tool in the hands of someone who understood it, storing heat for hours, cooking meat from the inside out, and creating flavors modern kitchens can barely reproduce. This wasn't just technique, it was a philosophy, the philosophy of a people who, when they lacked metal, learned how to turn nature itself into metal. In the Viking world, a feast was never just about food. It was a political trial, a ritual of power, a high-stakes gamble where a jarl or a conungur placed their reputation and sometimes their life on the table. As firelight flickered through the great hall and warriors sat in long rows waiting for steaming platters of meat, no one truly cared how good the food tasted. They were watching the host. A lavish feast meant a leader strong enough to feed his warriors. A poor one was the first warning sign of weakness. And the terrifying part is, no one would say it out loud. They would simply exchange glances, stay silent, and decide the fate of their leader before the night was over. It was in these feasts that silent betrayals began to grow. A warrior disappointed because his portion was smaller than another's. A clan feeling the jarl was no longer dividing spoils fairly. One tiny mistake, a missing platter, watered-down ale, a half-cooked roast could be interpreted as a declaration that the leader no longer had the strength to rule. And once trust wavered, the sword would speak the verdict. That's why every Viking feast was a hidden power play, a theater of shadows where a jarl could walk in as the unquestioned ruler and walk out with his fate sealed by the very people who once swore loyalty to him. In the smoke-blurred shadows of a Viking great hall, there was a group of people respected by almost every warrior, yet almost never mentioned in the sagas. They didn't lead clans, they didn't row longships, they didn't charge into battle with axes raised. But if they made a mistake, an entire clan could lose its leader, lose its winter stores, even lose their lives. They were the firekeepers, a hidden order that existed quietly in the background, the sorcerers of fire and stone in the Viking world. What's surprising is that this role wasn't meant for the weak. A firekeeper had to know which stones could handle heat and which ones would explode like grenades. They had to read temperature by the color of the flames, predict burn rates by listening to the crack of wood. They had to know when smoke was harmless and when it was a warning. And here's the part most people never expect. If a stone exploded in the kitchen, the first person blamed wasn't the one who carried it in, it was the firekeeper, the one ultimately responsible. They could be punished, exiled, or simply disappear from the community. Their mistake was seen as an omen, an insult to both ancestors and the gods. Because of that, cooking wasn't labor, it was forbidden knowledge. The secrets of stone, flame, heat, and smoke were passed from father to son, or master to apprentice, but never written down. Anyone outside that lineage had no right to touch the great hearth during a feast. And here's the biggest twist. The Vikings believed the spirits of their ancestors lived inside the hearth fire, which means the firekeeper wasn't just cooking for the living, they were serving the spirits who guarded the clan's fate. So what do you think? Could a simple cook hold that much hidden power? If you're curious or want to dive deeper into this secret order, drop a comment. Your question might just unlock another buried mystery from the Viking world. What few people realize is that in the Viking world, choosing stones for cooking wasn't as simple as picking a few off the ground. It was a survival ritual, a test only those who truly understood nature dared to face. Because one small mistake, a damp stone, a porous one, or one with water veins trapped inside, could turn the entire kitchen into a battlefield. Stories were passed down about river stones that, once heated to a glowing red, suddenly exploded and drove shards deep into a warrior's back like arrows. Death didn't come from an enemy, but from their own hearth. That's why the Vikings treated stones the way a blacksmith treats sacred steel. They chose only granite or basalt that had survived thousands of years of wind and ice. Stones dry, dense, and free of hidden moisture. And gathering them wasn't a one-day task. They hauled stones from deep forests and cliffsides, stacked them into massive piles, and left them to dry for weeks, sometimes months. The most shocking part is what they believed. An exploding stone was a sign of the wrath of fire. If a stone shattered while being heated, it was a warning that the coming winter might be brutal, or that someone had broken a taboo within the clan. Fire didn't just cook, it judged. It sounds insane by modern standards, but for the Vikings, this was their philosophy. To survive, you had to know how to speak with both stone and flame. What surprises most people isn't that the Vikings could cook with stones. It's that the dishes they created with this stone skillet technique were so good that even modern chefs would be stunned. It all began with a flat slab heated to a glowing red in the middle of a roaring fire. Once pulled from the coals, it wasn't just a scorching surface. It was an ancient induction stove, a technology the Vikings mastered 1,000 years before us. They would place freshly caught fish directly onto the stone, no cleaning, no scaling, not even gutting. The twist is this. The moment the skin and scales touched the stone, they charred instantly, forming a natural armor that locked every drop of fat and moisture inside. The result? A crust crisp like a snack, while the inside became so tender it fell off the bone the moment you tilted it. Even flatbreads were tossed straight onto the blazing stone. Barley or rye dough puffed up, within minutes, infused with smoke. With lightly crisped edges, a kind of Viking fast food warriors could whip up in the forest or by the shoreline. The most fascinating part is that they never saw this as primitive. To them, it was the peak of efficiency. No pot, no pan, no tools, just stone, fire, and survival intelligence. There's a Viking cooking technique that modern chefs find both fascinating and a little envy-inducing. It's so simple it sounds impossible, yet the results are so unbelievably good that modern science still can't fully replicate them. It's the earth oven, a method that looks primitive on the surface, but carries the fingerprints of an ancient knowledge system, half experimental science, half ritual magic. And the strangest part is this. Meat cooked this way often tastes better than anything produced by modern equipment. It all began with a ritual that bordered on the religious. A pit was dug with precise measurements, its bottom lined, with stones tested by time. Firekeepers burned wood for hours, sometimes the entire night, until the stones glowed like the molten heart of a sleeping volcano. When the flames died down, they covered the stones with fresh leaves, oak, maple, or ferns, creating a natural protective mist. And this is where the miracle happened. The meat was placed into the pit, wrapped in layers of leaves, and buried under the earth. No flames, no smoke, no sound. Only the eerie silence of the ground itself slowly steaming, an entire cow, sheep, or boar. Here's the detail that makes modern chefs shake their heads. The heat inside an earth oven never burns the surface. Instead, it seeps gently into each fiber of the meat, so slowly that every strand of collagen melts perfectly. The result is meat so tender, you could pull it apart with a breath, and so juicy that tipping it slightly sends broth flowing out like honey. No pressure cooker, no oven, no modern device can replicate this because only earth, stone, and time can create that unique, natural pressure. For the Vikings, this wasn't just a cooking technique. It was a way of inviting the earth itself to sit at the feast, turning nature into part of the meal. What do you think? If you had the chance, would you try meat cooked with this ancient, secret method? Leave a comment. Your idea might just inspire a full reconstruction of a Viking earth oven in a future episode. It's time to reveal one of those Viking techniques most people assumed was a myth, until archaeologists proved it was completely real. The Vikings could boil water inside a wooden trough. Yes, a wooden container, the kind that should burst into flames the moment it touches fire. It sounds like magic, but it was pure physics, powered by the boldness and hard-earned experience of people who lived right on the edge of survival. It all started with a massive fire, where round stones were heated until they glowed so intensely you could feel the heat just by looking at them, like miniature suns trapped on the ground. Once a stone reached its fire-mad threshold, they pulled it out with long wooden tongs, and even that motion produced sharp, cracking sounds as if the stone were threatening to explode on the spot. Then they dropped it into a wooden trough filled with water, meat, and vegetables. The moment the stone hit the water boom, a storm of bubbles erupted. The water boiled within seconds, steam rolling upward like an open-air pressure cooker. The stone cooled quickly, was pulled out, and replaced with another. That's how the Vikings kept their soup boiling, by injecting heat into it with stones that still carried the breath of fire, all without burning the wooden vessel. And here's the impossibly brilliant part, the detail that leaves our modern generation stunned. They didn't need metal pots, yet they still made soup, porridge, even brewed beer in the forest, in the snow, in the middle of a campaign. At the center of every Viking feast was a ritual no warrior dared look away from. The full animal roast over the great fire. This wasn't food. This was a declaration of power, a test of patience, technique, and the authority of the feast's host. The flames rose to a man's chest, roaring each time fat dripped down and burst into fragrant columns of smoke that spiraled toward the rafters like a freed spirit. The animal boar, deer, or cattle was skewered on a massive wooden spit, and it took 3 or 4 warriors rotating in shifts to turn it. They couldn't stand too close, but they couldn't look away for even a heartbeat. A slight misalignment meant one side would burn to charcoal while the inside remained raw. That's why the Vikings believed only those with hands that could listen to fire were worthy of this task. Throughout the process, they brushed the meat with a mixture of honey, ale, sea salt, and wild herbs, letting the skin tighten into a glossy, crackling shell while smoke threaded itself into every fiber like the signature of a fire god. And the dish that emerged wasn't just delicious, it was proof that the Jarl was wealthy enough, strong enough, and generous enough to feed his warriors with an entire animal roasted whole. In the Viking world, smoke wasn't just a way to preserve food, it was a silent political weapon, a signal of which clans had the power to survive the winter. If roasting a whole animal was a public display of strength, then the smokehouse was where real power was built, quietly. The strength of a Viking village wasn't measured by how many warriors it had, but by how much meat hung inside its smokehouse. Because if winter dragged on or war broke out unexpectedly, any clan without enough reserves would weaken in weeks, lose influence in months, and vanish within years. That's why the man in charge of the smokehouse wasn't just a craftsman, he was the guardian of the community's fate. He had to control the fire so it never burned too hot, or the meat would cook and ruin the entire batch. But he also couldn't let the flames die. That was a mark of failure, something that could anger the Jarl enough to punish him or even strip his honor. Some clans even treated the smokehouse as a national treasury, a place only the most trusted members could enter. Sharing smoking techniques with another family was considered betrayal. Cold smoke from birch, alder, or juniper seeped into every fiber of the meat, forming a protective armor. And when those golden brown slabs were finally pulled from the smokehouse, they weren't just food, they were a declaration. We are strong enough to survive the winter. We fear no one. There's a truth almost no one notices. Viking cuisine didn't survive because of fire. It survived because of an ecosystem of tools that were almost self-born and self-erasing, a system where everything they used in the kitchen could return to the earth, back to the forest, or back to the fire. No metal played a central role. Nothing was irreplaceable. And that was their real strength. A civilization that survived using only the materials nature allowed, and only allowed once. Every spoon, every ladle, every wooden trough, every stone tong was crafted by hands that understood their materials in a way modern people can barely imagine. A polished wooden spoon wasn't just for eating, it was a display of status. A drinking cup made from horn wasn't just practical, it was a declaration of clan identity. And pottery, despite being fragile, was treasured because it worked in earth ovens and held heat longer than anything else. But here's the real twist. The Vikings were never afraid of their tools breaking. A spoon snapped, throw it into the fire. A bowl cracked, bury it in the ground. An old trough, use it as kindling. No waste, no trash. Only a natural cycle they accepted as a law of the world. Because of that mindset, a Viking kitchen had almost nothing that lasted long enough to become a burden. Everything was created with one purpose: to help the clan survive the winter, the campaign season, famine, or blizzards. Looking back, the most impressive thing isn't that they boiled soup with stones or slow-cooked whole animals underground. The truly astonishing part is that they turned the entire natural world into their kitchen. No technology, no metal, just intelligence and respect for the materials they had. So what do you think about a form of cooking that leaves no trace? And would you like to explore more Viking secrets from winter clothing to longhouse engineering? Leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of this journey.